Okay, let's begin, I guess. People keep coming in. Uh, okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm Divyansh, and I welcome you all to the first talk in the Growing Up in Science series, which is also the first ever Kalpa event. So please bear with us if there are any technical issues. Growing Up in Science is an initiative was started by Veji Ma at the New York University in 2014, as I mentioned in the mail. The idea behind it is that whenever we students, whether graduate, undergraduate, or early career scientists, we look at established scientists in their fields, we look at their CVs, we look at their academic achievements, we get a very biased sense of what it's like to be in academia, what scientific success is like. And to counter that, in this talk series, the speaker will talk about the academic journey with a specific focus on the failures and the struggles they've had to persevere through. So the first speaker in our series is our director, Professor Jayant Udgaonkar, who I don't really need to introduce, but I'll mention some of the steps in his academic journey that he'll talk about in depth. He's a very distinguished biologist working on the problem of protein folding. He did his BSc from St. Xavier's College in Mumbai with a major in chemistry and a minor in microbiology. Then he did an MSc from IIT Madras in chemistry. He went on to do a PhD at Cornell in biochemistry in 1981 and finished his postdoc at Stanford in 1989. He then joined NCBS and worked there for about 26 years or so, where along with his research work, he held various administrative duties. He then moved to IISER Pune to become the director here in 2017. He was awarded the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize in the year 2000, along with many other awards. So I would stop here and he would go in depth about his journey. During the talk, feel free to ask your questions in the chat box. There will be a Q&A session afterwards. And those who are watching the YouTube live stream can also ask questions through the comments section below. And I would like to request you all to send the link for the live stream on the Kalpa website to any of your friends if they are unable to join here due to the limited capacity. We are almost full. Okay, so I'll share the link in the chat box for the live stream. Over to you, Professor. You can now begin.
Okay, thank you, Kalpa, Divyansh, for inviting me to do this. It's kind of been an unusual week out at IISER here, and it's nice to think of something else today, even though it's only my personal life over the last 60 years. So what I'll do is, just give you glimpses of what I think are important in making choices in your career as a scientist at different stages. And I'll welcome questions afterwards. So, I actually come from a rather privileged family in terms of education. My father was a distinguished professor at the TIFR. He started the theoretical physics group there. And my mother was a PhD in history. So I came from a family with a strong academic background. And not just academic, because academic is a very generic word, a scholarly background. Scholarship is becoming rarer and rarer in these times. And I remember a few years back, I asked one of my research scholars, as they were called in TIFR, who is a scholar? And the student replied, a scholar is someone who gets a scholarship. Scholarship involves really learning about things in great depth, to be able to analyze things, etc. So, as I said, I had a somewhat privileged education background. I went to a very good school. I had extremely good teachers. We had a maths teacher who would challenge us to give him any problem that he could not solve. We had a Hindi teacher who said, bring me any Hindi word and I will be able to tell you the meaning. And we tried our best to better them, but we just couldn't. We had a science teacher who discussed more than, dictated things, and an English teacher who was just superb. And so it's really, I had the benefit of a good education, both in school and at home. And sometimes when you have everything right, you take longer to figure out what you want to do. Now in school, they have career guidance. They had a career guidance exam where you had to kind of tick various things, and they tried to figure out what your interests were. And I was told to do, if I remember right, history, first choice, second choice was business. I was very interested in history. I'm not sure where business came into the picture, but I used to read a lot of history. So one of the big advantages I had was that at home there were lots and lots and lots of books. And I read a lot. I just read everything I could get my hands on. Science, general science, history, whatever. And that really helped me think about things in a better way. So in school, finally, in the last 2-3 years, I was in the old ISC system. Most of you would not be aware of it. That was an 11, you could essentially do an 11 plus 3 instead of a 12 plus 3, what you have this year at this time for doing BSc. And in the last 2 years, we had to decide about whether science or commerce or whatever. And it seemed straightforward to decide on science. Now, I started getting interested in biology at that time. And a lot, as I said, from the reading I did, not reading for the schoolwork, but other reading. And I can just not overemphasize how important it is for students at that age and later, and at all ages, to really keep reading about things. And I remember there was one book which I borrowed from my school library, a book called Death Be Not Proud by John Gunther. It's a book about a little boy who has cancer in the brain and his father's attempts to deal with the problem. So it is something, after reading that book, I got very interested in the brain. I thought I should do neurosurgery and all that. But I also became interested in chemistry at about the same time. So what also happened was the ISC school year ended in December in those days. And so you had a 6-month gap before colleges would start. And I used that time quite productively. I did, for example, there was a National Science Talent exam. I appeared for that. You had to do a project, and I did a project where I injected mice with some drugs, and I set up an apparatus to measure their muscle activity. That experiment worked very well, but then I didn't have any time to study for the theory part of the exam, so I didn't get the scholarship. But it was a wonderful experience to be doing all that. I remember my mother I would hold the mouse and my mother would inject the drug into the peritoneal cavity. So what also happened at that time was, we had about 20-25 students in our class doing science, and out of those, about 12 wanted to appear for the IIT entrance exam, the JEE, I think it's called now. I don't remember what it was at that time. And in Bombay at that time, where I grew up, the main coaching class was Agrawal's. So none of these guys had gone for any coaching till then. And they joined Agrawal's classes, which went on for 2-3 months. And so until then, we were hanging out together and doing various things. And suddenly these guys were all day in these classes. So one of my friends told me, why don't you also, appear for the exam? I wasn't at all interested in engineering, but I said, let me do it. So I didn't join any classes, but one of those guys who joined Agrawal's got me the previous year's worksheets. And for a month or so, I kind of worked through them. They were tough, doing on your own, but fortunately, I had my 2 cousins had been living with us for the previous 3-4 years. And one of them, Hemant Bhate, was just brilliant in maths. And maths was where I had a difficulty in the IIT entrance exam curriculum. And he just would solve the problems for me, which I couldn't do. So I did the exam. I didn't expect to really do well at all. And I didn't. I got a rank of probably of around 1100 or so. I could have joined one of the IITs, but none of the IITs had any biology at that time, and I had already decided I wanted to do something with biology. So I didn't even go for the counseling. So I joined St. Xavier's College then for, so this was still that 6-month period. And one of the other things which I had the opportunity to do at that time, and this again because, where my father worked, I got to work in an electronics lab at TIFR, and I learned to make things, electronic devices. I made some amplifiers, I made radio receivers, I made a full-fledged radio. And it really gave me the sense of fun of working with one's hands. Many Indian students don't really work with their hands. I've asked several students over the years, how many of you have fixed a wire to a plug at home? And the answer is more often no, rather than yes. At my house, one dirtied one's hands. And building those electronic devices really not just taught me some electronics, but also gave me confidence that I could really do something practical with my hands. So those 6 months were spent, I think, pretty productively in terms of giving me confidence about what I might be capable of. At school, I wasn't really what you would call a good student, good in the sense of academically good. My parents didn't really bother too much. My sister, who was 1 year ahead of me, used to stand first in class. I would not be in the bottom half, but not far above the median. I mean the mean, so it's. But there was no real pressure. There's only once there was pressure when in one of the early years I failed in my Hindi exam, and my mother was furious because she had been born and bred in Benares, and not knowing Hindi was a sin to her. So that summer, I remember she coached me in Hindi, and from getting 35% the previous term, I got 65% the next term. So she was happy. And it didn't go down again after that. So, there was no real academic pressure on my academics at any time. As I said, I would read a lot. I started off by reading novels. I would just pick up, I would essentially read anything I could get my hands on. So, occasionally they would come and my parents would come and ask, what are you reading? And they would see it, but they wouldn't really say much about, oh, why don't you do studies or why don't you whatever. So pretty much free to do what we wanted. It was a happy time. Could play all sorts of games, tennis, football, cricket a little, table tennis, swimming. So life was good. It's important to do everything for a full education. And I hope many of you have had the chance to do all that. So anyway, I joined St. Xavier's College after those 6 months after school. And I decided that I would do, so at that time, that first year in Bombay colleges was called Inter. I joined the Inter year. I skipped a year actually, because that IISc exam allowed you to do that. So we were all younger than the other students in the class by 1 year. And I did that inter year, what was called the inter year, what would be now called first year BSc. And at the end of that year, you could apply for medical college. Now, I was somewhat interested in medicine, but it wasn't really a strong interest. But I did the entrance exams. Well, the entrance to the Bombay medical colleges was through your result in the inter exam, and I applied for some other well-known medical colleges, and I didn't really get into any. And for the Bombay medical colleges, I could have just about made it, but I didn't. It didn't bother me too much. I was a little upset at not getting that 0.5% more, but not upset at not being able to do medicine. So I had already formed a strong interest in chemistry. Part of that interest was really because of looking at a book sometime during school, maybe the last part of school, called The Structure of Proteins by by Dickerson and Geis. It was a fantastic book with wonderful illustrations. If any of you get a chance to see it, you must. And that really got me interested in proteins and biochemistry. And the choice available in those days was such that I had already gotten interested in chemistry, I guess. So I thought I would major in chemistry, and I had a subsidiary subject to take also. So I did microbiology. So both subjects were fun. Again, we had fantastic teachers. I mean, I remember a teacher in chemistry called Melky Alvarez, and I've not had as good a teacher, or heard of as good a teacher anywhere else in the world. And he was just fabulous. And others too were very good. There was Dr. Prabhu Desai, there was a Dr. Freitas in microbiology. He was all extraordinarily committed teachers, and I really had the benefit of a great education. So I did my BSc in chemistry. And what was a defining moment for me really is what I did between my second year of BSc and third year of BSc in that summer vacation in between. Again, I had the advantage of being the son of a TIFA professor. And what I got the chance to do was to work in Professor P.K. Maitra's lab at TIFA that summer for 2 months. Initially, I kind of resisted agreeing to go, because those days I used to play football every evening, and that was very, very important to me in those days. But I went, and I would be there from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. or so. Occasionally, I would come back for the last 5-10 minutes of football, in time for the last 5-10 minutes of football, but I invariably missed the football. But it was amazing fun in the lab. I got to know how scientists think and how good scientists think, how the work ethic of a good scientist, and how to really think about doing experiments. Nothing worked when I was there, but that really, told me that this is what I want to do. I should be doing research in my career. And so that really was very important for me. And I think my father also saw that this was a kind of defining moment for me. And, he saw what I got an opportunity to do because I was his son. So he started a program in TIFA called Visiting Science Research Program, where other kids like me could come in summer and work. And now I think most institutes and universities in the country have these type of programs. So, my father was a remarkable person. Right from school times, he would discuss things with me. He treated me more like a colleague rather than a son. And he would give me articles he would be writing. These were articles at that time. His interest had shifted to education policy, science and society issues, nuclear disarmament, etc. And he would give me the articles to read. He would ask me for my comments. He would take criticism well. And it was quite remarkable that the relationship we had. He really didn't interfere in my academic choices at all. So even when I had, gotten into IIT and decided not to go for counseling, he just asked me, "Are you sure you don't want to take it?" I said no, and he just left it at that. So there was really no pressure to do one thing or the other. So I remember, but many years later, uh, he once asked me, "Did you ever regret not going into IIT after school?" And I said no. I mean, and the main reason I said no at the later years was because of the very good teaching we had at St. Xavier's College. And also that, I could develop my interest in biology better. So really, I didn't do well in exams in college either. I'm not a good, I'm not good at doing exams, because when I have to study, I kind of read around, all around the subject, and read not just one textbook, but I'll read 3, 4 books which describe the same thing. And then I get left with little time to do the actual things you have to do to crack exams. But it was fun. And I actually, having said that, I should say I ended up doing pretty well in my BSc chemistry exams. I stood first, not because I knew too much, but I gave myself 2 reasons. One is for I don't know how, my practical exams just went like clockwork. And I think I scored very high in them. You know, during the actual term, when I did the practicals, things never worked. So by the law of averages, something had to work at the end, and it worked. And also I felt sick during my exams, the theory exams. And because I was sick, I kind of focused more on reading just what was needed to be read for the exam. And then I could answer things. So anyway, uh, I had decided to do chemistry. I decided to do my master's in chemistry. So after my BSc, it was like a deja vu. I decided I would do my MSc in general chemistry in one of the IITs. So I applied to IIT Madras, IIT Bombay, and IIT Kanpur. At that time, each IIT had a different exam for MSc admission. I didn't hear back from Kanpur at all, so I don't know what happened. I did the exam for Madras. Now, all the IITs for the 2-year MSc program required that you should have done maths in your BSc, and I had not. The IIT Bombay people wouldn't allow me to apply. But I went to the department, I argued with them and said, I had got admission 3 years earlier in the JEE. I've studied maths on my own. Your entrance exam had maths in it. If I pass, what's the problem? And they actually agreed. But then I went and told other friends, and when a large crowd went and asked the same thing, the department said no. Anyway, so I got into IIT Madras. They also had that requirement of maths. And when I went to the IIT for doing the paperwork for admission, I was very worried. I remember that they would notice that I didn't have this basic requirement and send me back home. But fortunately, they didn't notice. And I joined the institute. So now that was a completely different world. St. Xavier's College, Bombay, is probably one of the most westernized colleges in India. There's a very cosmopolitan, a different breed of people. The IIT, if you're living in an IIT hostel or perhaps any hostel, and you have people from all over the country, and you have traditions and values which are very different from what I saw, for example, in St. Xavier's College. People would ask what your caste was. In Bombay, that I had never been asked that question. And it was amusing. And my class had, I think, 12, 15 students to begin with. They were all from Kerala and Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, I think, maybe some from Andhra Pradesh. And they were all perhaps toppers in the college. And so, when of our first meetings, they were, uh, talking about their exams and how well they did. And they all had percentages of the order of 95, 98%. Uh, I was a topper in Bombay University, but I had only 73%. So they started laughing at me. But anyway, we had good friends there, and it was a wonderful time, those 2 years. I had to struggle quite a bit because, even though I'd studied maths on my own, and even though they had two courses in maths, which we all had to do, doing quantum chemistry with perhaps not as good a maths background as one should was not easy to do, nor was, say, a spectroscopy course. But it was good fun, and I got more and more interested in biochemistry, even though there was no biochemistry being taught at IIT Madras at that time. And I got very interested in kinetics and thermodynamics. It was a good department overall. The quality of teaching was nowhere as good as in St. Xavier's College. And the younger faculty were poor compared to the older. They had a lot of inbreeding at that time, except for two. I remember Gopinathan and Vishwanathan were very good. But by and large, it was a good experience. It was a rigorous course, 40 hours a week, and we had fun. I played a lot of bridge. We would sometimes start on Friday night and end on Monday morning, not just one weekend, many weekends. And I did reasonably well at the end of it. So towards the end of my BSc, I decided I would apply for a PhD in the US. Now, the question, I did apply for one campus job placement interview. I remember it was a Glaxo Welcome, I forget. The name of the company changed at around that time. And I went for the interview. I was answering all the questions, I thought, pretty well. But, my father at that time was a pretty well-known scientist, and even that HR fellow who was interviewing said, "But you are the son of this one, you're not going to take a company job." So I didn't get a job at Glaxo. Anyway, so I decided I would apply for my PhD to American universities. I applied to a dozen universities at that time. I got admission into 3, and I chose Cornell. There was my project at TIFR, that summer project I talked about, was in yeast genetics. And, perhaps the leading yeast geneticist, one of the leading yeast geneticists in the world, Jerry Fink, was at Cornell at that time. So I went there. I found when I joined it, Jerry Fink was moving to MIT. But even before that, we had rotation projects to do. And this is why I think, I did my first project in a neurochemistry or neurobiophysics lab. And that was a wonderful experience for me. I was working on the acetylcholine receptor, the receptor in your muscles, which allows nerve transmission to happen. And I just loved that lab. And even before I started my other rotations, I decided I would join that lab. And I got George, my advisor to agree to that right at that time. I did the other 2 projects. One was with Jeff Roberts, where I did a lot of DNA sequencing. We had to use these large 2 or 3 feet long gels to run. We had these long gels to run. It was painful, but it was interesting. And Jeff Roberts was quite a smart fellow and good to talk to. And then I started my 3rd rotation, but then I had a personal tragedy. My sister, who was a year senior to me and doing physics at University of Maryland, got a meningitis infection and passed away just within 3 days of being hospitalized. That was a terrible time, and both for me and obviously for my parents. I came back, and the only way I could figure out I could deal with not thinking about what had happened was really to immerse myself in work. And I just didn't do anything else for that, at least for the next year. And I had a very supportive uh, housemate, and finally it worked out quite well. I got into trouble when I arrived late that semester because I'd gone home after the tragedy, and I had to teach that semester, and the instructor was upset with me to start with because I'd come late. And when a rat bit the hand of an undergraduate student, I got fired. Undergraduate students in these Ivy League colleges are not meant to have their hands bitten by rats. So anyway, I got fired. My advisor didn't bother because the TA wasn't there for the money because I had a separate fellowship. And but the next semester I was the ideal TA in the lab, but the instructor was of a much better quality also. So it was an interesting time. We had to do a lot of courses, and that's really very important. I would tell all of you that in your PhD or at any time you can do as many courses as you can. I started many more courses than I finished, but I ended up finishing also a decent number of courses. My major, the department I was is biochemistry, cell and molecular biology, but the program in Cornell required that you do a minor even for your PhD. And I wanted what web in my thesis committee, and what web was in the applied physics department. But I wanted him in my committee, and I wanted one chemist, Gordon Hammes, in my committee. Gordon Hammes had no problem being in my committee. He was a friend of my advisor, George Hess. What web said you have to do 4 PhD level courses in physics or applied physics. Now, I wasn't quite ready for that, but I said, okay. So my second year PhD, I had pretty tough coursework. The quantum chemistry course taught by Jack Fried, or Jack the Ripper as we called him, was pretty tough. But the following semester, we had a course by Michael Fisher on StatMech, which was even tougher. And I think I just about passed it. The passing grade was C+, and I just got it. And I think, the physics TAs were perhaps sympathetic to a biologist, biochemist doing the course, and were kind to me in the grading. But actually, I should have paid much more attention to the StatMech course, because in the last 10, 15 years, it would have helped me even more. I mean, it was good that I did it, because knowing the basics, it wasn't a basic course actually, but being exposed to the subject really helped me in thinking about protein folding. So it was a very good experience. I played a lot of tennis, I remember, at Cornell. I played squash also. In my first year, I played football, but for some reason, I never played football. It's very important for students, not just students, all of us, to play games throughout one's life. It keeps the mind fresh. So my PhD went pretty okay, I guess. I had to do many different things in my PhD. Those days, this electrophysiological technique, the patch clamp, where you record from single molecules and cell membranes, had just come out a year or two before. And I went to a lab in Buffalo to learn the technique. I was there for 2-3 days. I didn't learn much. I came back. And then there was a I kind of half-built patch clamp system of my own. It had been built before by David Tank at Wattweb's lab, but it had been completely broken up and dismantled. But I figured out what it was and built it up again. And after some effort, I managed to get it to work. During the course of my PhD, I really had to do quite a few different things. I had to do laser photophysics. I had to spend a lot of time working with dye lasers, and dye lasers are notoriously bad and don't work half the time. And those were early days for dye lasers also, I think. And I spent much of my PhD on the floor with the laser open and me on the phone with the technician and the factory trying to get the laser to work. But I managed to also get some results out. And, I'm not supposed to talk about science, but what I'm trying to tell you is if you want to do science, you really have to be ready to dirty your hands, be ready to do many different things, to think in many different ways. And that's what I got an opportunity to do. I spent about 5-6 months just writing a computer program for analysis of patch clamp data. I'd not done any programming before. I had to learn, at that time, the language was Fortran. I learned it, but, there were two, there was a large computer system in the applied physics department in Cornell at that time. My lab, although I was George Hess's student, I worked in Watt Webb's lab space. So there was a, common computer system the size of a room, but perhaps with the power of less than the PC these days. And so I spent 6 months. I used to, have to go every few hours to the system administrator to help me with the programming. At the end of every, few months, I had a 100-page program. And then I decided I would test it. I debugged all of it. So I said I would test it. For testing it, I had to create data. Now, I forgot when I created the data that the way the program worked was the data should have noise in it because you need to find baselines, etc. And because I didn't do that, my program went into a big infinite loop, and it went, it couldn't do anything and just kept trying to find the baseline over the entire weekend. And my boss got a very big computer bill the next month. But it was fun learning new things. And I think that's very important for all of us at all stages of our lives, to accept challenges when they come and try to learn new things, do new things, etc. I had to learn how to connect A to D, to program A to D cards, for example, analog to digital converter cards in machine language. And, these were, it was difficult, but one could kind of figure out how to do it with people's help. And, there were people and if you're in applied physics department with other students and you're willing to engage with them and learn from them, you can learn a lot. There was a student, I remember, Joe Mantis. He would lend me things, I needed to borrow recorders or some electronic equipment. He would tell me, I remember, that he was in his 9th year in Webb's lab, but Webb was in his 6th year, if you understand what I mean. So it was good fun, and I learned a lot. But then came the time for finishing, and I was ready to finish before 5 years. My boss had gone on sabbatical, and he said, you have to wait till he comes back. So I said, my house lease is over. So he said, okay, you stay in my house. He was away. So I stayed in his house till he came, and then I went for my postdoc. So now deciding on a postdoc was not an easy decision. It's one of the major decisions PhD students have to do, take. And I actually considered 3-4 people in completely different areas. There was Tom Jovin, I remember, at Göttingen, who was a cell biologist. There was Howard Berg at Caltech, who worked on bacterial motors. And there was Robert or Buzz Baldwin at Stanford, who worked in protein folding. And I visited all the labs, and I kind of liked the type of problems I could work on in protein folding. So I decided to join Buzz Baldwin's lab. Uh, so I moved from Cornell to Stanford in I guess 1986. And that was a completely different environment. Suburban California versus upstate New York are completely different cultures. And it took me time to adjust. I was in a biochemistry department, which was situated in a medical center. At that time, the department was perhaps one of the best in the USA. It had 2 or 3 Nobel Prize winners and another 5 or 6 people of the same caliber or better caliber. And the students were kind of snooty. They basked in the reflected glory of their advisors. The postdocs were of very good quality. And for those of you who are deciding to do postdocs, you need to go to a place where the postdoc quality is very good, because that can really help you figure out how you need to work to be successful in science. So I joined the lab, which was protein folding. I had to learn NMR. I had never done any NMR myself before. So I had to go to a lab in Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, to learn some NMR. There was an NMR at Stanford, which is shared by four faculty members. Buzz was one of those, and I got time on that. We students had to maintain the NMR ourselves. And I didn't know much, but I could collect spectra. It wasn't too difficult to learn how to do that. It's not as easy as it is these days, but not too difficult either. And then one had to assign peaks in the protein spectra, and that was taking time. So I was in a biochemistry lab where everyone was doing wet biochemistry. I was this guy sitting at a desk with sheets with spectra and trying to draw lines on them to see which peaks were connected to which others in the spectra. And people would laugh at me, I remember. Then finally, after some months, I started doing some wet biochemistry. And people started clapping, I remember. But what I also had to do was to build a quench flow machine for doing the type of experiments I wanted to do. So this is a machine which allows you to mix things in milliseconds. And it was essential for my experiment. Now, Buzz, I went to Buzz and said, I need to get these parts machined in a workshop. And I said, it'll cost so much. He said, that's a lot. I've never spent so much money in my life. So I said, it's only $8,000-9,000. Yeah, and he said, oh, but he finally agreed. So then I had to, also build get an electronic controller. And that cost $5,000-6,000 if you had to buy it. And I didn't want to go to him again to ask for that. So I decided that I would build one myself. And over a period of 2-3 months, I did that. And it's amazing that it worked the first time I switched it on. I did all the wiring right. So it's possible to do things with your hands once you have the confidence in doing that. And my early years, do what I did in my early years really gave me that confidence. So I spent 3 years in my postdoc. I started applying so then came a difficult period. I finished 2 years and then I said, okay, I need to go back to India. I had always in my mind planned to come back to India. And so I visited IISc. Professor Balram took me around. I nearly got him killed and myself killed because he took me around on his scooter. And coming from America, I didn't know how to sit on a scooter. I sat on it like women wearing saris do. And since I was heavier than him, the balance on the scooter didn't work, and the whole thing nearly fell down in front of a truck with us on it. But he took me around IISc, and I got quite impressed. He's a very good scientist, and so I applied to IISc. I wanted to join the molecular biophysics unit, but I think they already had someone in mind, and I didn't get an offer from them. I did get an offer from one of the chemistry departments. And I was told that it would be jointly with biochemistry. But anyway, I had that, and I had another offer from CCMB, but that was at a lecturer level, not at an assistant professor level. So I said no to that. But there was a lot of pressure on me, both from my postdoc mentor and my PhD mentor. Both were people I respected a lot. They were very completely different personalities. Buzz was very quiet. I remember when I would go and to discuss things with him, and especially in the early months, there were these long, pregnant pauses when neither of us knew what to say. And I remember him once telling me, I know I can't help you much, but other than referring you to the old literature. And, but old literature is something he knew in the back of his hand. He could tell you, look at this paper published on this date in this journal for looking for this particular matter. He was really very good at that. And George was a very friendly guy. He would come to the lab all the time and ask questions, what's new? And I think have half picked that up from him and bother my students in the same way. So Buzz was a rarity, I think, in American science, even in those days. Even in those days, there was a certain level of arrogance in American science that the only place where you could do good science is the US. And I didn't agree with that. But, then you're under a lot of pressure, not just from the mentors, but from your friends, from your colleagues in the department, that you should not go back, but work in India. So I remember Buzz got me a faculty job interview at a top American university. I went there and I came back. It went pretty well. And then Buzz asked me, will you join if they offer you? And at that time, I had the IISc offer. I said, no, I want to go back to India. And then my PhD advisor was saying, why didn't you join the Whitehead Institute at MIT? But, I was going through a tough time in those days mentally, in the sense of, because of this pressure, I was really wondering whether I was making the right decision. NRI Indian scientists these days and forever have this attitude that not much good science is done in India. They're very happy to make these remarks when they come visiting. Not all of them, but quite a few of them. I wasn't quite an NRI. I had spent 8 years in the US, but I could see the level of science happening. It wasn't what I would have liked to see. And I remember my father visiting once, and I mentioned this to him, and he kind of kept quiet. And he said, "Why don't you come and show that you can do good science in India?" So, but it was a very difficult time, and I was really stressed for a month, 1 month, 2 month period, and so I guess I should stop now. Well, but anyway, finally I was had also applied to TIFR, and I was in touch with Obaid Siddiqui and PK Maitra, and then Vijay Raghavan, who's now holding an important post in Delhi, phoned me. He was a faculty member at TIFR at that time, and we had a long chat, and he said, "Why don't you join TIFR?" I couldn't quite decide, so I decided I would go back to India. I went back in November of '89. And over the next 2-3 months, I visited IISc, I visited TIFR, talked to people, and couldn't quite figure it out. And one fine day, I just decided I'll join TIFR. Now, my offer at TIFR was at a new center which was supposed to be being built in Bangalore. I got it just a couple of weeks, I think, before I left for India. And it was not at TIFR in Bombay. I'd asked for a job in Bombay, but they denied it. I wasn't offered one in Bombay. And so that was also a difficult thing. There's a center which didn't exist where I had a job. And IIC in old departments, should I join one or the other? Now, what happened was when I visited IIC, I met the then director. I met the director, and I said I would need at least this level of funding to get started. And he said, okay, but when I went back to Bombay, I said, I thought I'd get it in writing, so I wrote him a letter. He replied saying he would, but his letter went to Stanford and never reached me. So I kept waiting, nothing came. Then finally I joined TIFR. So my first 3 years were at TIFR, and that was not a good TIFR, not an easy time. I was in the molecular biology department, and because it was a new center, I was offered a job at a higher level than TIFR normally offered jobs to people. So there was jealousy, and there were a lot of taunting questions. This center will never come up. When will it come up, etc. And that went on. Before I joined, Vijay, you'd get all those questions. After I joined, I started getting those questions. But I could start my activities there. I was given a small lab space, maybe 300 square feet. And I got my first students there. And that's when I realized how difficult it is to supervise students. You really have to be a shrink to each of them. Figure out what is necessary to get different students to work to the best of their abilities, or even better than what they think they are capable of working. So, you have your lab, you have your first student, you want that student to be working all the time and doing everything in the way you want her to do. And that didn't happen, and I would get upset. I would get upset at her, and she would get upset in return at me. And but by and large, it went well. And then when the lab grew to 3, 4, I equilibrated better, and things were a bit more calm. So I started my lab at TIFR in Bombay, and in that time, when I accepted a job, my job was at a non-existing center, and I found that the location in Bangalore itself had not been agreed on. And the first few months, Vijay and I went and visited plots of land in Pune. NCBS would have come up in Pune if we had said those plots of land were okay. But in our minds, we had decided on Bangalore, so we said no to those plots of land, even though they were actually pretty good. And Vijay started things in Bangalore, and I set up things in Bombay. I was ordering equipment for the center, etc. Then Matthew joined, and Panikar joined, and Mani Ramaswamy joined. And we had a very good crew of people. Matthew and Panikar next moved to Bangalore, and I moved as I said, 3 years, after 3 years in Bombay. So at that time, it was a time when, the NCBS faculty were quite productive in terms of making babies. And so I moved just after my son was born, my first kid. And my second one was born a year and a half later. And those first few years were a great deal of fun. Kids are extremely inspiring. People talk about a balance between family life and professional life. I think it comes naturally when kids are fun and you interact with them and things are good at home, and you don't find any, I didn't find any problem in switching between the two. Maybe my wife would have to a bit. She's a lawyer and she was working at that time, but we managed pretty well. Um, my daughter was not a good sleeper. And so what happened because of that was I never tried sleeping before 2 a.m. or 2:30 a.m. because she'd wake up a few times before that. And I knew she would wake up. So if I went to sleep, I would have to get up because I had to take care of her night. I had night duty. And so I decided 2:30, 2 a.m. is until when I would work. So I got a lot done in those nights because I was working between her waking up spells. Um, but having kids are really inspiring and great fun, and really, I think it was very helpful to my working, my thinking, and whatever. They make you happy. So if you're happy, you do things well. And I didn't have a problem at all. And in general, we coped quite well. I mean, salaries were low at those times, and I remember we used up quite a big fraction of my wife's savings, but it wasn't too bad at all, and um, we managed quite well. Now, fortunately, uh, my lab work started. I mean, lab started doing well, and I didn't publish anything for 4 years after joining TIFR NCBS. I was slow in getting started, but I took care in developing the problem and thinking about the problem. That's very important. After 4 years, things started becoming better. And then I realized that perhaps the major researcher in protein folding was working with the same system I was. But then I had to really push myself to compete. But fortunately, he didn't do too much with that same system. Um, it was, so things worked well, and I had very good students, and we were really, I think, limited by our own intellectual. I mean, the work was limited by our own intellect, and that's a good situation to be in. It can be confounding on you to, be beating your head against something, but thinking about things. And sometimes that would be over a year and a half. I remember one of my students had data one time for a year and a half. I couldn't figure out, he couldn't figure out. Every month or so, I would go to him, are you sure the data is correct? And because if I could explain the data if it was not correct, and if something else was happening. But he insisted his data was correct, and it was correct. You always need to stand up to your boss when you've done things well and correctly. And after a year and a half, we together figured out what the data meant. But in the type of work we do, collecting data can be hard, but thinking about it is sometimes much harder. And it's nice to be limited by one's intellect. Things went generally well. I got involved in administration because I was the first faculty member to join NCBS. I got promoted the earliest. Vijay was still actually a TIFR member, though working at NCBS. And, things worked well and things went well from then on. So I think I really have nothing like regrets. People have asked me, do you have regrets going back to India? Uh, you know, I don't, and I would get irritated at that question. And these are questions typically from NRI Indian and NRIs. And then I would start asking them, do you have regrets staying back in the US? And then they would keep quiet. So, I talked about the stress I had while coming back. that's probably the most stressful time I had in terms of making decisions about my career. And it finally, when people ask me why are you going back, I would say to eat Apus mangoes and to hear Bhimsen Joshi. And those are two very good reasons to come back to India. But I wanted to prove that one could do as well in India as in the US. And I think at NCBS we built a center which I think kind of showed that that's possible and can be done and is being done. And that was very satisfying. I mean, other than the science being satisfying, the satisfaction of having helped to develop a flourishing research center was also there. And, so I spent 27 years there and decided I needed a change. I was a visiting professor at IIT Bombay, and I spent a stint on the campus there. And I liked that environment of undergrads and, a busy campus with all the different fields of activity, subjects of activity. And I decided I needed a change. And I talked actually to the IIT director, who happened to be my school classmate. And he was ready to give me a position, but then Professor Balram nominated me for this job and I couldn't say no to him. So I've been here for the 3 years and I think perhaps I should end now. I talked too long. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Professor, for this wonderful talk. We have quite a few questions, and I would like to tell everyone to feel free to ask questions directly live. And I would read out the questions that we have here in the chat box. So Pallav is asking, was it hard being the son of a distinguished scientist? Because there exists a burden of expectations on students like that.
Oh, there were certainly expectations, when in high school, my first science teacher said, "Oh, you're going to do physics, aren't you?" And I said, "No, I don't think so." And it was, I mean, there were expectations, and there were more expectations from perhaps family, not immediate family, but my father in the greater family circle was recognized as someone being quite, well, for want of another word, brilliant. And I mean, I was nowhere in his caliber, but there was some type of expectation, but nothing major. And in later years, when I came back to India and started establishing myself and would go for meetings, I remember actually it was very nice. I would go to some conference, then I would get introduced to, Jayant Udgaonkar, and the person would say hello and then suddenly say, "Are you Udgaonkar's son?" And suddenly there was great respect in the person's eyes, and sometimes they would hug me or something, and this was really very nice. I mean, that's happened even in Pune when after coming here, been asked whether it was, Udgaonkar is not a common name, and so it's nice being known as his son. There was no overt expectations. Yeah.
Do you still read, learn as widely as you used to back then? How do you manage to do that while keeping up with your research and the literature from your own field?
My reading is certainly less. I read very little fiction these days, practically none. Even books, I keep buying books and I realize that most of my books are half read. I don't have the time to read as much as I would like. my reading for my research is still there, but even there, I'm a little worried that it's going down, and I need to figure out how to bring it back to the level I would like it to be at. So reading is a problem, but I need to discipline myself better. Uh, I mean, again, the book which is next to my bed these days is a history book. And the book I read before that was also kind of biography, history book. These are the type of books I like to read. But both books are half read right now. So one day I shall complete them. But, it's fun when you can get the time to read. What's happened in the last few months, for some reason, is my TV watching has gone down quite a bit. So I have some more time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Arijit Chatterjee asks, what was your approach when you had to learn something completely new, like StatMech or NMR, as you mentioned?
You just went into it and learned it. There's no point thinking about it. You have to do something, you do it. I mean, if you see, the thing is, if you're in science and you want to do research, you're going to have to learn new things throughout your research career. And StatMech was hard for me because it was a pretty advanced course. And Michael Fisher, if many of you may not know, is probably one of the biggest names in StatMech. And he was an arrogant professor. I remember once one student tried to tell him that something he was writing on the board was not correct. And he stood up and said, well, you were standing. He said, do you know that other than being a professor of physics and a professor of chemistry, I'm also a professor of mathematics. And that shut up everyone in the class after that. But the course was tough. And but the way I did it, again, I did what I always did. I would go to the library, collect 5-6 different books, and sit with them and figured out which book explained one particular topic the best. And for each new topic, I would do that. I spent a lot of time on that course. And I should perhaps also admit that when you do that type of thing and become familiar with the textbooks as well as I did, when assignments came, I knew which book to look at for thinking about the assignment question. So, that helped a lot.
Aarti asks, for a greater interest in scientific research in India, do you think that private sector in India also needs to invest more than they currently do?
Well, certainly. I mean, I think in other countries, private investment is not much behind government investment in science. Uh, the government can only, I mean, one would like it to do much more, but we are a poor country compared to the US, Europe, and there's no way investment in science is going to match that in the West or even in China. And industry should do it, but industry, again, I think doesn't have confidence in Indian science. I mean, other than Indian scientists, not, the politicians don't have confidence, and the industry doesn't have confidence in Indian science. We are still not gotten away from that thinking that foreign things are better, foreigners do it better. It's probably inheritance from being a colonial, you know, being colonial subjects to an empire. And we have to become more, as a country, become more self-confident about ourselves. I think private investment in science in research is increasing, but it should be much, much more. Yes.
Okay, so I'm very happy to see this, that Veji Ma, the creator of the series, he's also watching this on YouTube, and he's asking, um, hi, this is Veji Ma from New York University. I'm really excited to see that IISER Pune is starting a Growing Up in Science series, and thank you, Professor Udgaonkar, for telling your story. I was wondering whether in the first 4 years of your lab, when you didn't publish, you had any doubts whether you would make it?
No, for some reason, I never have doubts that I would make it. I don't know why. You know, I somehow had already built up this self-confidence in myself. Part of it is perhaps, uh, the work I did as a postdoc is is perhaps still one of the most important experiments in protein folding, even after 30 years, 35, 30 years or so. And when you've done something good, you get a confidence in yourself that you're going to be able to continue doing good. So I didn't really bother for those 4 years. I mean, 1 year actually went into publishing we submitted our first paper at 3 years, but it took a year to get published. And I knew we were doing things, and I just didn't think about it. I got a little nervous when I saw Alan first working on the same system. His paper came out before ours, and but we just pushed ourselves a bit harder and we got things done. And then I think he decided that not because of us, but he wanted to concentrate on the other systems he was working on. Fortunately for us, because his lab had more than 40 postdocs. Yeah.
Satnik asks, from your vivid experience with administrative duties from very early years in your scientific career, do you think it positively impacts the scientific activities for you? Or would it be better to not have had so many administrative tasks?
It would certainly have helped my science if I didn't have the administrative duties. At the beginning years of NCBS, perhaps, especially at the time the campus was being built, maybe 30-40% of my time was going into non-research type work. And so that way it was not an easy time. But, we were a young bunch of fellows, and we were keen to do something good, and we egged each other on, and it was fine. Now, does it help research? I don't know. See, the thing is, in terms of thinking in general, administrative problems are nowhere as difficult as scientific problems. So now if you're doing both, then administration can be a distraction, because it's relatively easy to think of administration. And this is something you have to just read and sign and check that it's okay and sign. Or you go and talk to someone and say this has to be done in this way and whatever. Science, you need to put in far more effort and far more thinking. I don't think it helps in doing science. And it's a kind of diversion away from doing science. And if you allow it to become too big a diversion, then it will certainly have a negative impact on your science. So, that was a big worry for me when I came here. Obviously, the administrative duties here are far more than I had at NCBS. But, I think I went down a bit in my research activity, and hopefully it will come back. It's coming back, I think.
Nikita asks, something almost all my friends and I struggle with is that we quite never feel like we are accomplishing everything we'd like to. Is this something that ever passes? After all these years, would you say you're happy with how you spend your day?
Yeah, I mean, I don't quite. You're not. Is the question? You feel that you're not accomplishing what you think I didn't quite understand the question.
Feel free to pitch in, Nikita.
It was just about, um, do you feel like your time goes where you want it to?
Oh, see, I didn't have long-term goals when I started my research career. I was thinking of 5, 10 years at a time. And, you know, what happens is that when things start working, it kind of has a multiplying effect and things keep working. Once the lab started doing well, it just kept doing well. What happened was, for example, students did well, then a new batch of students would want to do as well as the previous batch or batch of previous students. And so things went well. And, uh, you know, certainly quite a few projects didn't work out. But in general, and many of the things we did were not planned. But you did things which we did things which excited us at any particular period of time, and they would normally work out.
Okay. Kritika is asking. Pretty long passage. It's been an honor to hear your journey and get inspired from you. It's not every day we get the opportunity to get insights from our director. I'm just one of those students who has really got inspired from you today. And so I really strongly feel more students across the nation and the world should get the opportunity to get inspired from you. What's your take on popularization of science? And more importantly, have you thought about writing an autobiography or a biography such that your words and experiences reach out to more people?
Wait, this is, see, the thing is, you have to figure out in your life what all you can do without one activity harming the other activity. And that type of balance is important. I mean, at some level, it's a personal or you know home work balance. But even in your work, there has to be a balance in all the things you can do. Some scientists, especially these days, many of the younger scientists, even in India, spend a lot of time networking. I never did any networking. And, perhaps that's not good for my students because, if you network, then you can get your students into good places. But my students got into good places on their own, not because of me. Uh, but you don't. You see, there are many things a researcher has to do. You have to teach. One of the things I did right from the beginning was teach every year, even in a research institute like NCBS. And that really helped my research. I can't tell you how important that is to keep for the research when you teach. So you have to teach, you have to travel to meetings. I traveled actually very little. Even in my last few years in NCBS, I was the faculty member who traveled the least, I think. I really did know networking. And I remember a few years ago, Dave Tirumalai, who's a well-known protein folder, gave me a lecture on the importance of networking and how I should do more of it. But, as I said, you have limited time. You have a 24-hour day. You want to sleep at least 8 hours, 7, 8 hours. And you also have to play tennis and maybe football in those days. And so if you have to network and do research and travel to meetings and teach, can you do all well? And I just didn't have the time, for example, for networking. Now, if you're saying, can you write a book? I could write a book, but one has to find the time to do it. Today I didn't know what I was going to talk. I finally talked without looking at any notes. But in the morning, I decided I better write some notes. So I started writing notes and spent 4-5 hours actually doing that. And then I was telling Sangeeta, my wife, before I came, maybe I should write a memoir after doing this. But, it's just going to stay a file in the computer for now. Popularization of science, I would like to do it again, but it's an activity at least now, I don't have the time for. And, it's also, I have a strange type of mind. I don't find it easy to remember things. There are some people who can remember a lot of things. And I used to worry about it, actually, that, I would forget things. And, if you're popularizing, you should be able to talk on many different subjects. So I read a lot, but I don't remember a lot. And I would like to do it, but, time is what, how much time does one have? If I do more popularization, I'll spend less time in research. And that I don't want to do. So one thing I decided when I came here was I would keep to my policy of minimizing travel. So, most directors travel like crazy. I have not, as far as I know, traveled too much at all. So you have to make some decisions which is best for you.
Okay. Shreya asks, following up on your answer to administrative duties, what was your motivation to take up the position of the director, despite it having the potential to compromise the time you would be able to give to your research?
No, so as I told you, I kind of had made a decision to go to a place where there were all the sciences and undergrads. And so then, I had one worry. I don't know how correct or whether it was being too big a worry. But worry is a misuse of the imagination. But I worry about things. And my worry was that if I go to a new place, I don't want to suffer from political issues, internal politics. So I thought that if I come as a director, I wouldn't have that problem. That's not really true, but more or less true. But I never really imagined that I would become a director. I'd been offered directorships, not offered or asked to be considered, that I should allow myself to be considered for directorships several times before, but I always said no. But, one reason also was I started thinking about it was my mother was quite old, living in Bombay by herself, and I thought I should be nearer to where she was. That was a consideration, perhaps not an active consideration for coming to this part of the world from Bangalore. And it's been fun at IISER, so I have no regrets. There was a advertisement for one of these, not computer, TV boxes, tabletop boxes. Shah Rukh Khan was advertising, and he said, "Don't be santusht." Okay, and I thought that was very nice. And then I read somewhere this Australian bowler Shane Warne saying, "Don't be satisfied, but have no regrets." And I think that's a good philosophy to have. Do things to the best you can. Don't overstretch yourself in anything. And you should end up having no regrets or as few regrets as possible.
Abhinav is asking, what do you think about publish or perish system, which prevails many research universities? Is this the best we can have?
Which what?
The publish or perish system, which prevails many research universities. The excessive stress on publishing new papers.
See, the thing is, I believe in scientific accountability. And one of the things which I started doing in NCBS was having a tenure system. We supported new faculty members well, but then then you're accountable. You have to do well. You have to push yourself to do well. Now, this publish or perish is a nice sounding phrase. It's some things are always in between. I mean, it's important that you publish well. If you overdo it, the quality of your papers will perhaps suffer or could suffer. So it's important that you publish a few papers every year, and to show that you're intellectually alive, and you are using taxpayer money well, and are contributing to society in some way. So I wouldn't say, I mean, you're talking about two extremes, publish a lot or perish. I don't know what this perish means. There are many departments, universities in India and elsewhere where there are people who don't publish at all or end up, being dead bone. But, you shouldn't not do anything, but you should do good, reasonable work. And publications are one metric of that. The quality of publications is a more difficult metric. And if you have both quality and quantity, it's very good.
Okay, the last question. How would you compare a PhD in India and the US today? I believe we are improving, but how different or better is it than the time you decided about your PhD?
It's a difficult question for me to answer because I've not, my experience of PhDs in India is as being a mentor, not as a student. So I'll put it this way. In several places in the country, there are facilities and environments where it is possible, there's no excuse not to do well. So now I'm putting that at the level of the faculty member. In India, unlike in the US, most of the research is done by PhD students and not by postdocs. There are far fewer postdocs in India. So if you join a good lab in India, it's possible, I think, for a committed student to do as well or better than students in the US. I remember a few times over the years, I've asked some of my students the question, you would have had classmates in your MSc who went and did their PhD in the US. Do you think they have done better than you? And so far, I've not got a yes answer to that. Maybe they didn't want to say yes, but no, they were honest with me. And I think it's possible to do well here. Now, the important point is focus and the belief that you can do well and not look for excuses. It's true there are far more hassles in India, but it's not, life as a PhD student in India is perhaps, I would say, more comfortable than life as a PhD student in the US. Here you get a hostel, you get food which is kind of subsidized, you get a pretty decent fellowship now. And you can actually, I think, save more even in dollar terms than someone doing a PhD. At least that used to be the case in my time. And it's probably true now, I'm not sure. Than someone from here going and doing a PhD in the US, because there you have to worry about where you stay, about, where you eat. Those costs are much more than living in a hostel. You have to make your own food. You have to do everything for yourself. Here, at least at NCBS, students were certainly mollycoddled. And that's not good, this mollycoddling of PhD students. Once you're in your PhD, you should be in the real world. And, be ready to face life as, your peers who have taken a job outside are facing the real world. That you have to deal with things on your own. But, here I wouldn't use the word mollycoddle, but, we pamper. And I think once you go abroad for a postdoc, it's only then that you will realize the level of pampering in at least some of the institutes here. So I'm talking the top institutes like TIFR and NCBS and ISC, and I think here also. There you have to do many more things on your own. You're not, you can't really, people here expect much more from the system, what you call the system, which is basically the institute, than students in the US do. And so, life is more difficult in India, certainly. There are more hassles in India, or at least were at that time. Now, I don't know for how it is for a student here and there. But, you need to, what you want finally is to be working with someone with whom you can work well. And if you're lucky in that, then it should not matter. If you work with someone who is not doing well, then it's still possible for you to do well. You shouldn't be limited by your advisor's capabilities, but you have to push yourself harder. All PhD students should not be, for all PhD students, your intellect of your advisor should not be limiting. But again, there, you expect too much of your advisor, I think, in most cases. I think that's my general thing in India, that students expect too much of the advisors. In the US, for example, many advisors don't talk to the beginning students for the first 2 years because they think it's a waste of time. The student doesn't know much at all, and it's a waste of time. That's what the advisor considers. But for me, I've just enjoyed working with students. My first 6 months here where I had no student here was a terrible period for me. And, students are what keep me going. And so it really depends. That also depends on luck, what type of advisor you get. It depends also on what type of problem you work on. So you can't think of this thing in a very general way of doing it in the US versus India. But if you're talking about the quality of the research which comes out in the two places, I think it's possible to do well in both. In the US, what helps is that you have many more postdocs, and most students end up learning from postdocs and not from the advisors. And that helps a lot. So that's one advantage of working in the US, doing your PhD in the US.
Okay. I guess we'll wrap up here.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Udgaonkar. No, this was amazing. Thank you for this wonderful session, and thank you for taking so much. It's a long period of time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.